Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
business editor Greg Jefferson.
Person Brian Chasnoff.
Is that your title, official title?
I know I'm a person. That's all.
Yeah, that's what counts.
Yeah, I was a reporter before, and now I'm on the editorial board. I don't know what I am.
And I admire the fact you're not letting your job define you.
Yeah.
I think we all have that. Yeah. That's a problem.
Him.
You're a better person.
A lot of political news in the past week. Much of it happening at the county level. Michelle Barrientos Vela, the notorious constable, is no longer a constable. It's official now. She lost her legal battle to hold on to her seat because, as you all remember, she announced that she was going to run for sheriff, which activated the resign to run.
Yeah.
Thing. So she was basically forced out by the county commissioner. She challenged that, said it was an excited utterance, and she's gone now. And we have a veteran from the a deputy sheriff named Leticia Vasquez, who is now officially there. So we can rest easily, and I think that our long national nightmare is over. Probably bigger news in the past week is the fact that we have a prominent new candidate for county commissioner. This is the Precinct 3 seat that Kevin Wolf is leaving. And there have been a few candidates who have stepped up recently, maybe not as many as I expected, but we've had Mitch Meyer, the developer, Weston Martinez, conservative, who kind of tends to run for everything, a couple of former judges, Celeste Brown and Jeannie Wright. But just in the past week, we have learned that Trish DeBerry, who is a former Ken's 5 TV journalist and has done public relations in San Antonio for like 20-some years, she is running for that seat. What do we think about that? I mean, is she the front runner in this race?
I would think so, just because, I mean, if name ID means anything, I mean, we've, readers, listeners, and viewers of local news they've seen her and her name for years. So I would think that has to count for something. If though it is kind of an anti-establishment election year, she's not in a good way, because her firm has they do a lot of commercial work, including corporate, they've got corporate clients like HEB, but they also do a tremendous amount of government work and bond elections, with the county, SAWS.
I think they did like maybe the term limits election years ago.
Yeah. So, I mean, she's, just by virtue of the fact that her firm's name is the DeBerry Group, she's tied to, a lot of those personalities and a lot of those issues that are pretty establishment. I mean, and pretty mainstream.
It's a Republican seat. She's running the Republican primary, and like you said, I guess the question is, what kind of? This is going to be a presidential election year.
Yeah.
I mean, Donald Trump will be on the ballot in the primary, probably not having serious opposition, but I think it will be interesting to see what kind of Republicans will turn out. Yeah,
and I think during, to the extent that there are going to be candidate debates, I mean, I think she's going to feel a big pull from her right. A lot of people questioning just how Republican she is. She's going to have to prove her conservative bona fides.
Yeah. I think that she, as you said, she has a lot of connections with the business community, and I think sort of had some feelers out there before she announced. She officially announced on Saturday. Her first fundraiser will be next Monday, the 21st. So, I mean, there have been other people who we've heard about. I mean, one person who could affect the race is Clayton Perry, the councilman, who has expressed an interest. But my sense from him is that if he was not required to give up his council seat to run, he'd probably do it. But he doesn't.
And that's always a good sign, isn't it?
Yeah,
they really want it.
But that would have to happen. And
only if he runs as Black Viper, which is the on his license plate. He has a.
Is that right?
What? Serious?
Yeah. He's got a vanity plate on his car. I forget the kind of car.
It's
a sports car.
Is it a Viper?
What's the story behind that? Do you know?
No one's written the definitive story of that yet.
I didn't even know about it.
Someone needs to write that.
Yeah,
that's amazing. He's
I
one of the last people I would ever call a Black Viper.
I was going to say, I know what my Wednesday column is now. So if Black Viper
he should run that
that
on that name.
Well, somebody made the point to me, which I think is interesting, and I hadn't thought about it before, but that if he resigned to run for county commissioner, the council would have to appoint his successor. I mean, there would be a special election a few months down the line, but at least temporarily, he's in a very conservative council district. At least temporarily, they would probably pick somebody quite a bit to the left of him, like say Ezra Johnson, who ran against him when he first got elected. Yeah, so that could be complicated for him too. I think in a Republican primary, if people are thinking, "Oh, well, you left that seat, and now we've got this person that we don't want." So I mean, these are just these complications that come up. And
we should also, as far as Trish DeBerry, we should also note that she ran in 2009 for mayor against Julian Castro. Who'd had, he'd been out in the political wilderness for 4 years, getting everything together, lined up for this particular race, and crushed it. I mean, he won without a runoff, and she was one of how many?
There were like four serious. It was basically Julian, her. You had Sheila McNeil, who was a council member, and then you had Diane Cibrian, who was a council member, and Trish finished second. Second.
And I mean, she ran a credible campaign. I mean, she didn't have any major flubs that I can recall. I mean, not like Diane Cibrian. I mean, she had some problems in that race. She did. Trish avoided it, and had it been another opponent, I mean, who knows? Somebody who not Castro.
Trish is very politically savvy. I mean,
and she ran Ed Garza's 2001 campaign. She's been on both sides of political campaigns. I mean, I think looking back on that 2009 race, I think she set a goal: if I can hit 30%, and if Diane Cibrian hits like 15, we got a runoff, and then I can do something there. And she hit 29, I think a little over 29%, but Diane Cibrian did not hold up her end of the deal.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was the problem.
Yeah, so she's obviously got the bug, and she apparently never got rid of it. So here she is.
Well, in looking at the county commissioner candidates have no limits on how much money they can raise, but city council candidates have had pretty strict limits for a while. $500 for a council candidate and $1,000 for a mayoral candidate per election cycle. And we've got a council member, Manny Pelaez, who's trying to do something about that. He has proposed doubling the amounts for both of them. I think the argument is, and maybe I'm wrong about this, that just the effort that goes into trying to having to get so many of these small donors there's an element of difficulty in that, and also you're so limited that you aren't able to get your message out as well as he would like to, or some candidates would like to. I mean, what do we think about that?
Well, I mean, apart from the fact that that's kind of contradictory. I mean, it's if you're saying that you're spending too much time making fundraising calls because it's small dollar stuff, but yet you also want to spend more money to get your message out. I mean, you're going to be spending as much time. Right. I think it's a matter of inflation. I mean, the more, I think council members will find themselves, if they double the threshold, they're going to be on the phone making fundraising calls as much as they were before. Yeah. And, campaigns are just going to become more expensive.
Yeah. And I know he's talked about wanting to be able to raise more money to be able to get the message out. And on the first part of it, I mean, I'm assuming that's part of his thinking too. But I know for a fact that he feels that not being able to raise as much money because of these limits makes it harder to get the message out.
And you also have to think about the corrupting influence of money in politics, right?
Yeah.
I mean, do we need more of that?
Yeah, and the idea, this is like totally old-fashioned, but part of the beauty of a council race is it really is one of the last few offices where you can actually go around to neighborhood associations and connect with voters, and you can, especially in his district, which has a lot of neighborhood association and HOAs, you can make your case directly to voters, and it is obviously less reliant on campaign contributions than a mayor's race would be.
Right.
Like, you can't possibly block walk your way across San Antonio, but you could you could cover a good chunk of a council district in a few months.
Yeah, and I mean, I think last year, Mayor Nuremberg expressed some interest in sort of loosening those restrictions. There has been some interest, and I mean, I wonder if there's just a thought that maybe the council went a little too far. I mean, the idea of having strict fundraising limits is good, but maybe they went a little too far years ago.
I mean, and that is actually probably it's at least a valid argument. Whether you buy it or not is another thing. But it did come about in the aftermath of the council scandal, where you had two council members crap walked by the cops out of City Hall, basically. And, there was, fundraising was at the heart of it. Well, bribery. And there, if you consider bribery kind of an offshoot of fundraising, I guess it's kind of, it was related. Yeah. But there were a lot of ethics rule changes following that. And yeah, I mean, you could make the argument that, reducing council to, a max of 500 per cycle per person, and the mayor 1,000 is kind of going a little overboard.
What was it before?
Geez, I don't remember. It's been 15 years.
Well, someone who was instrumental in some of these ethics reforms is our former mayor, Julian Castro, and he's now running for president. And a couple of weeks ago, Saturday Night Live had a skit in which they depicted a Democratic presidential debate. They had the most recent Democratic debate had 10 candidates, and in this skit they had 9. They had 8 of the 10 who were in that skit, and they also had Marianne Williamson because they thought they could do something funny with her, even though she didn't qualify for the last debate. And so they left out Julian Castro and Amy Klobuchar, and immediately the Castro campaign and a lot of his supporters expressed indignation.
Or maybe this is a compliment because he's not mockable.
Yeah, well, this is the thing that's interesting to me because, and I understand the thinking was, they left out the Latino candidate. They haven't had a lot of Latino cast members over the years. Maybe they felt they didn't have anybody who could play him. So these were some of the issues that came up. But as recently as like a year ago, there was Dan Crenshaw, the state rep who was upset about the way he was ridiculed on the show. Donald Trump has been upset. And I think this marked, with the Castro situation, the first time that you had a campaign complaining about not being ridiculed.
Well, yeah, I mean, with Dan Crenshaw, I mean, he actually got on, like the following weekend he was on SNL. So
it almost worked out. So what ended up happening was there was a lot of talk about this. Lin-Manuel Miranda, the creator of Hamilton, offered to play him. I think John Leguizamo might have done the same.
Joaquin Castro did.
Joaquin, the Julian's twin brother, offered to do it. So this became kind of this became a story unto itself. And this past Saturday, Saturday Night Live made amends by including Julian Castro in it was an LGBTQ town hall skit, and he was one of the 5 candidates included. And Lin-Manuel Miranda did play him. So we've all seen the performance. What do we think?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think Greg and I both agree it wasn't especially funny, but neither is 90% of SNL. So
yeah. Right, yeah, no, it was as bland and unfunny as Castro can sometimes be himself. Actually,
ouch. Man.
Yeah, send your emails to G. Jeffers.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And I think that.
How do you follow that?
No, you're taking a stand there, and I admire that.
It's nice to be business editor.
One of the things that struck me about it was really generic. And I mean, Lin-Manuel Miranda is obviously he's a great performer, brilliant guy, and everything, but. It was, there was nothing really of Castro in it. There are certain things that he does that are very specific to him. Francisco Vara Horta, who used to work here and has actually played him at the Gridiron shows, has kind of captured this little thing that he does when he wants to show he's really compassionate. And he goes into this and he goes gets very intense. And then, of course, like if you've seen like the recent ad that he did, the anti-Trump ad he did a couple of months ago. And I think there are other examples of this where he'll be speaking in a very calm tone. And then when he goes into like Spanish, he'll be, ya basta. It gets very much louder.
I'm surprised they didn't play off the Biden attack more, like, are you forgetting what you said?
That was an obvious thing to do. And so this was, what they did was basically just had him kind of come out and say, as a Democrat, I apologize for not being gay, which was, it had nothing to do with him. There was one moment where he thanked the person for the question by saying gracias, which again is kind of generic. And then it ended with really a joke that was about Lin-Manuel Miranda, which was a Hamilton joke.
Well, yeah, I was going to say it's really telling that was the funniest part of the whole bit. I mean, the reference to Hamilton.
Yeah. I think there are things they could do with him, but they just haven't resonated enough. But it's the weird thing is that when he got excluded, I was thinking there was actually an SNL skit in late '91 on the Democratic candidates. The premise of the skit was, at that time George H.W. Bush was so popular, the thinking was like no Democrat really wanted to run against him. So in this skit you have Mario Cuomo and various people all like saying, yeah, don't vote for me, I'm terrible. Like Mario Cuomo saying, I've got mob ties. You don't want to vote for me, because it's like, wait, I don't want to face this guy. Obviously that turned around in the next few months. But Bill Clinton was not even included in that skit because Bill Clinton was just not enough. And there was so much you could have done with Bill Clinton and that they later did with Bill Clinton. But at that time it was like, so with Castro, I think there are things that you could do with him. Yeah. But at this point, he just hasn't resonated
with Castro. I mean, he if you're gonna satirize him or if you're gonna parody him, it takes some work. I mean, he's kind of a production. I mean, he's a very cool customer. Yeah. I still love the New York Times Magazine profile of him about him not emitting any real energy. I mean,
yeah, that's right.
What was it? Yeah, there was this great line. I wish I could remember it, but basically he's if he were an energy source, it would be like zero.
That's right. And I think that the thing that, one of the things in the skit too was that he was trying to push this idea that he was Latino Obama, and he was trying to create a hashtag called Latino Obama, and that New York Times piece actually kind of referred to him in those terms. And one of the things that was often said about Obama was that he was difficult to do because he was very self-aware. And I think that the people who were easier, Bill Clinton was a smart guy, but also he had these outrageous tendencies that maybe he was not fully aware of himself. Somebody Rudy Giuliani who says like weird, outrageous things and doesn't seem to be aware that he's doing it. He thinks he's totally normal.
These are big personalities.
Easy. Whereas Castro is very self-conscious and self-aware and contained, and Obama in his own way was like that too. And I think those are the people. Somebody like LBJ. You can do him you could do all day.
Right.
So anyway, I think. Dana Carvey has claimed over the years that it took him months to be able to nail George H.W. Bush, that he was terrible for the first few months. So maybe if Lin-Manuel Miranda gets some more, if Castro stays in the race,
he needs to work on that.
Yeah, he does need to work on it. Just briefly, I wanted to mention before we wrap this up, I spent a lot of the last week talking to local Donald Trump supporters, and one of the things that I came away with is, obviously, some of the things were things that we know that, their loyalty is much more to him than to the Republican Party. Many of them have been Democrats in the past. But one of the things that struck me is I was thinking about how performers, I think it's like a Bruce Springsteen thing where he says, well, many years ago he said, well, when I reach the point when I look into the audience and I don't see myself in their eyes, then I know I got to quit. And this idea that you want to identify with the people in the crowd and you want them to identify with you. And I just feel like Trump gets, every time he gets maligned as a racist or whatever terms get thrown out about him, I think it bonds him to his followers even more because they're feeling, a lot of the people I was talking to, they get flack from their friends and their relatives. And some of them are afraid to mention at work who they support. And they feel like they're getting called all these things. They're being called deplorables or whatever. And so every time he gets attacked, it intensifies that. They feel like we're in the same boat.
Well, yeah. Nancy Pelosi was quoted saying something I thought was interesting. She said, Trump makes a virtue out of breaking rules, or rule breaking a virtue. And she meant that as an insult, but I think that a lot of his supporters probably appreciate that. Because for whatever reason, they feel hemmed in by rules, and they feel like that is a virtue to be able to transcend, the bounds of politics as usual. So that's just a sense I get. Folks who follow it, who are concerned about the rule of law, find it very troubling and disturbing, obviously. But
yeah. There is, if you're a Trump supporter and you identify closely with him, like and it was a great piece, and I think that really came through, that there was, they kind of saw themselves in him, and they assumed that he saw himself in them, and with all of the attacks he's taken, I mean, I think in a large degree justified, but to them that they almost take it personally, but it does, it kind of instills in them this kind of us versus them mentality. And you can, where a lot of people will say, trying to lean on the president of Ukraine to get dirt on your political opponent is, that is beyond the pale. If you identify closely with Trump, it's just more gamesmanship. It's like, it's just another political attack. And they don't see, they're not seeing that, there are huge constitutional issues here.
Not to mention the fact that it warps foreign policy. I mean, I don't know what that point needs to be made more often,
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I found in talking to people about it is just, instantly they would go to, Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. Why is it was the Trump response, which is why is Hunter Biden making $50,000 a month with this on the board of this Ukrainian company, and so it would really shift to that.
But then Trump's own children are making money as we speak in foreign countries off their father's position. So
it's I mean the thing that stands out to me is that. Given how much political trouble he's in right now, and I mean, I think we're looking at a likely impeachment. I mean, he'll probably survive that in the Senate, but I mean, he's even in the Senate. I mean, there's nervousness. I mean, a lot of senators really don't want to talk about Republican senators don't want to talk about the situation, or they're changing the subject. So I mean, he's in as much political trouble as he's been in, I think, during his presidency. But I didn't sense from any of these people, like even they might say, "Well, I wish he wouldn't tweet so much" or something. Some of them would say that.
What about his abandonment of the Kurds? Did that come up in your conversations?
This happened really after a lot of the situation there with Turkey and Syria happened after the interviews that I did, but. I don't really think it's affected. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of people who are saying, well, these critics, they're saying that we should have kept our troops there, and these are the same people who didn't want us to go into Iraq and didn't want us committing American troops in the first place. So that seems to be the pro-Trump argument, that he's doing what he said he was going to do. He's getting troops out of harm's way. And all, these people on the left, although in this case, he's actually gotten a lot of criticism from the right as well. But a lot of what I'm hearing in defense of him is saying all these people who 10, 15 years ago were saying we've got our troops in all these places they shouldn't be. Now they want them there. Mm-hmm. So,
I'm curious about what happens if, in 2020, whatever happens with impeachment, well, assuming he's not removed from office and stands for election and he loses, like what happens then with his supporters? I mean, it's nearly certain that he's going to claim, malfeasance at the ballot box, something horrible, it was stolen from him. And, everything we've seen from his core supporters tells us that they'll probably agree with him. And then what? I mean, what's the political climate going to be like?
The most fascinating political question of our time, as far as I'm concerned, is what happens to the Republican Party if he loses? Can you basically go back to being whatever the Republican Party was before? And you can argue that it was moving in the direction of Trumpism anyway, and you'd had the Tea Party movement, and there was a tension there already. But does it go back to being the party it was before him, or will he just continue to command the loyalty? Because I just feel that most people, like I said, that I talk to, a lot of them were. This is how strange it was for me, is that there were many of them, I'd say most of them, said they liked Ted Cruz initially. Some of them voted for Ted Cruz in the Republican primary of 2016. And some of those same people turned around and said, but I've never gotten over the fact that Ted Cruz didn't endorse him in his convention speech, even though we know this Ted Cruz has spent the last 2.5 years really, just praising him. Yeah. But some people have made this leap from being Ted Cruz loyalists who didn't really trust Trump or weren't sure about him to becoming so loyal to Trump that for 3 years now they've hung on to this resentment that Ted Cruz didn't.
Which is weird
give him
because that's exactly the kind of thing Trump would have done.
I think you're right. I think you're right. But that really shows how he has sort of reshaped the Republican Party, and it's all a personal loyalty. And what do you do when he's gone?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, on that on that note, we will end this week's podcast. We'll be back next week. Take care.